Okay, now we're doing this book right here, Prevent and Reverse Obesity by me, P. Rogers. We're on page 53 if you're following along, chapter 3, the chapter on obesity theories. Okay, so the incidence of obesity in the United States has gone off the charts. It used to be relatively uncommon before 1980. And I can still remember when I was a kid in junior high, sitting at I went to Catholic school, and I'm sitting at the Boy Scout meeting with my mother. And my mother, for anybody who knew her, my mom was very funny. She was like a comedian, okay? And she was always making vulgar jokes. She was a real devout Christian, but man, was she funny. And the scoutmaster was a guy named Mr. Sullivan, an old Irish guy. He was very nice, but he's kind of funny with a big belly. And he looked kind of sad a lot of times. So my mother would say to me, "Peter, why is Mr. Sullivan so sad?" And I'm like, "I don't know, Mom. I'm just a little kid. I'm like in junior high or something." And I have no idea what she's talking about. She says, "Because he can't find his peenie." And that's how it was in the 1970s. Everybody made fun of fat people, made jokes about them, okay? It was a rare thing to see a fat person. Okay, let's see what else. Oh, on a cold day when my brother's girlfriend was wearing a miniskirt, my mom would say, "Michelle, you are going to catch a cold in your pussy." My mom was always making funny comments like that. Whenever she was around, we were always laughing. Back in those days, you could joke about anything. Back the 1980s, I think, was the best decade ever in America in my life. Okay, I lived through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s up till now. And look at the comedians on in the 1970s and 80s. Animal House, John Belushi, Sam Kinison, Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, Rodney Dangerfield. We were always laughing. The movies were great. And, Rocky in the theaters. And America was much more unified then than it is now. I think that's intentional. Body mass index is a way to estimate whether or not a person's fat. BMI, kilograms of weight divided by height in meters squared. So a normal BMI is less than 25. Of course, if you got a big frame, you're a muscular person, then your BMI is not as valid, okay? And, I'm about 5'9". Here's a picture of me when I was a college wrestler, okay? So I used to be a pretty muscular guy. And if you're muscular, then you're going to have a higher body mass, and it doesn't mean you're fat. Okay, that's when I was a college wrestler back in the good old days. Okay, theory number one of why are people so fat? Okay, one of them is that nowadays, because you got refrigerators, you can store a lot of high-fat food like meat. It'll store much longer, so people eat a lot more meat than they used to, and it's more readily available, and they have the CAFOs, Concentrated Animal Feeding Organizations. Back in the 1950s, Ansel Keys, who was a great researcher, and he really was great, and Dr. McDougall said all kinds of great things about him. They tried to badmouth the guy because paleo, keto, carnivore, they know that they have to try to discredit all the real science, and they have to try to discredit all the epidemiology because paleo, keto, carnivore has no evidence to support it. Okay, actually, there's one little bit of thing that I would say about paleo, keto, carnivore, that modern meat is much worse than meat was in the old days, fish or wild caught meat, because nowadays in a CAFO, they pump it full of hormones like estrogens, they pump it full of chemicals, they feed it all this GMO garbage, they give it all these antibiotics, and it's very high in fat. It's much worse than it used to be. So a little bit of meat wasn't as big a deal back in the day as it is now. And most people are trying to detox in a sense. So what I'm trying to say is wild-caught meat is not as bad as CAFO meat, but it's still not good for you. All right, so anyways, there's much more meat, processed food, and other junk sitting around in the refrigerator. It's easier to get food, especially low-quality food, than it was in the old days. People also used to smoke a lot more cigarettes, which makes people skinny, but it burns holes in their lungs and makes them sick. Okay, here's just what some fats look like. So here is a long-chain saturated. Saturated means saturated with hydrogen, so there's no double bonds. A fatty acid has a carboxylic acid at the end, which just means a carbon with a carbonyl group, double bond to oxygen, and then a single bond to a hydroxyl group, OH group, also called an alcohol group. It's amphipathic, meaning that it's both polar in terms of the bonds to oxygen, and nonpolar, the bonds to hydrogen. Okay, but when you have something that's amphipathic, polar and nonpolar, it can have detergent-like properties, which are bad for the gut. Okay, so here's sat fat. And sat fat especially is the one that, of the different types of fat, that's most prone to causing insulin resistance. Oh, by the way, this is the methyl group, CH3, right there, okay? essentially all animal foods are high in sat fat. With skim milk, you can take out most of the fat, but you're still stuck with all the animal protein, so it increases the risk of prostate cancer, elevates mTOR. It's not good for you. Okay, and then here is the inhibition of the inner mitochondrial membrane by especially sat fat, which is bad, because then you start leaking electrons from electron transport chain of the inner mitochondrial membrane. They drop down onto oxygen, form free radicals, superoxide. The mitochondria can neutralize them with superoxide dismutase, SOD, under normal conditions. But when there's too many of them, you can develop oxidative stress when the oxidants outnumber the antioxidants. And that can damage your mitochondria, which you don't want. That accelerates aging to damage your mitochondria. That's one of the reasons why I make such a big deal about all these mitochondria inhibitors. If you damage your mitochondria, you are accelerating your aging, and you don't want to do that, because then you accelerate your risk for atrial fibrillation and for dying and for being frail and weak and stupid, demented. Okay. So animal foods are just a loser for health, you know. You're inhibiting your mitochondria, you're increasing your risk of obesity, you're activating mTOR, you're accelerating aging, you're increasing your risk of osteoporosis because of the negative charge, especially from the methionine. So you're not going to win with animal protein. Okay, let's see here. This is just a little bit about insulin sensitivity. That normally insulin will bind to the insulin receptor and cause the glucose type 4 transporters in the cytoplasm to move up to the plasma membrane so the glucose is allowed into the skeletal muscle cell. Eating is called prandial, so postprandial means after eating. After eating, the majority of the glucose should go into your skeletal muscle cells. But if you have insulin resistance, because the saturated fats absorb more rapidly, gets into the skeletal muscle more rapidly, causes insulin resistance, then you're not going to get that insulin, be able to get that insulin into the skeletal muscle. So you're going to have the insulin remain elevated in the blood for a prolonged amount of time. That's called postprandial, after eating, postprandial hyperglycemia, high blood glucose. And you don't want that, because that starts causing problems. So that's normal insulin receptor, normal insulin function with the glucose type 4 receptors. Here's what insulin resistance is all about. With insulin resistance, you now have what is called overnutrition, the excessive amount of saturated fat getting into the mitochondria, inhibiting the inner mitochondrial membrane electron transport, which is basically like an assembly line, and you've now blocked the assembly line from running, so everything backs up. Krebs cycle backs up, glycolysis backs up in the cytoplasm, and the message of overnutrition is sent to the cytoplasm, and it signals that the glucose type 4 transporters must not be allowed to go up to the plasma membrane. You cannot take in any more nutrients. We already have overnutrition. Okay, and that's what insulin resistance is all about. And the main thing that causes that is high-fat diets. Okay, there is more things that cause it. I made entire videos about insulin resistance. I wrote an entire book on how to prevent and reverse diabetes. So if you want to watch my videos on insulin resistance, I made a newsletter on insulin resistance. You'll see there's a video right there. I have a whole playlist of videos on diabetes. So we're not going to go into this in more detail at this time, but diabetes, type 2 diabetes is associated with making people fat, and people who are fat are predisposed to have it, and it causes markedly increased risk of kidney failure, heart failure, premature death, stroke, atherosclerosis, microvasculopathy of the foot, getting your toes amputated. Every single day for the last 30 years, I see diabetics getting their feet and their lower legs chopped off because of atherosclerosis in their legs. Okay, we'll talk about all that stuff on a different day, but the point for today was just to get to hear that sat fat is the main mechanism of insulin resistance, but there are a bunch of other ones. And it causes overnutrition and blocks the glucose type 4 transporters from going up to the skeletal muscle plasma membrane. Thus, you end up with postprandial hyperglycemia. Okay.